Thanks so much, everyone, for joining us today to learn a little bit more about document management and how we approach these big projects. So just quickly, our three big topic areas for today are just firstly, document management 101. So what do we mean when we say document management, and what are some common challenges? We'll talk through some detail around those challenges and where they originate. And then the bulk of our chat today will be about how we focus on end users as it relates to document management projects. So with that said, let's get rolling here. So in the past several years, we've implemented solutions across the board. So when you think about document management, you may think of any one of these tools, for example. We've implemented several of them. Examples are SharePoint Online, Box.com, Google Apps, or Dropbox. Those may be names you recognize. But it's really important to know right from the outset of this presentation that when we think about document management, we think about much more than just the tool. So of course, the technology is important in any project and in any solution, but it's really just the platform upon which a good document management solution is built. So the platform is enabling what organizations ultimately do with document management. Some other things you might think about when you think about document management beyond just the technology platforms are things like folder structures and naming conventions, retention schedules if you're subject to any of that, governance policies. So lots of nitty-gritty detail when it comes to document management, things that need to be thought about for sure, but still, even with the technology and all of those details accounted for, a document management solution really isn't complete until we think about how the business interacts with documents. So it's not about the documents themselves, but it's actually about how people interface with documents, but most importantly, it's how business process and people are optimized in their activities by way of documents. So it's about the business, and it's about users and how they use their documents in their day-to-day lives. So just quickly, I'll run through a couple of the benefits of great document management done well. It opens the doors to all kinds of efficiencies around collaboration and access at all kinds of locations and across multiple devices. It helps to reduce the risk of data loss and also lends clarity and ease of administration to security. But at the end of the day, productivity is the name of the game when it comes to successful and well-implemented document management solutions. So first, let's talk about a couple of challenges that organizations often experience related to document management and also where they sometimes originate. So these are just a couple of examples. I know that there are lots of examples of those challenges kind of realized. So I'll just cover these three here because they seem to be most common among organizations I work with. So first, we often see that there are documents stored in multiple systems in organizations. So sometimes that's kind of by design. So there are multiple applications that are able to house documents. But then sometimes it's very much not by design, and that is actually a product of some shadow IT going on in the organization. So when I say shadow IT, I mean that users who are just trying to get their job done have created solutions for themselves, workarounds. So maybe they've created, in the context of document management, maybe they've created a Dropbox account using their work or personal email, and they're using Dropbox to share documents back and forth and to access documents offsite. Or maybe they've done the same thing with Google Apps, or maybe they're saving documents to their desktop in a way that's not supported by the IT group. So as a result, documents are kind of all over the place and really challenging to monitor and govern and administer. We also see legacy systems quite a bit. So document management projects are challenging and they're fairly hefty. So organizations sometimes will leave legacy systems in place that just aren't meeting the needs for users. And I think to the same point, sometimes we see that singular systems can't meet needs for all users. So again, you'll see multiple systems sprouting up all over the place, and maybe individual groups of users' needs are solved by one system or the other, but there's no holistic approach to document management across the organization, and thus it's just inherently exposed to risk and challenges with administration and confusion across all those different business groups. So when some of these ineffective document management challenges are in play, you'll hear about them. So these are several frustrations that we hear about. I'm going to focus on just a couple of them. So first, it's that end user frustration bit. If you're struggling as an organization with document management, your users are likely telling you about their frustrations. They may not be able to articulate quite why they're frustrated, but they'll say things like, well, I don't know what the current version of this document is, or I went to an offsite meeting and I don't have access to this key document for that meeting. So they'll voice their concerns, and you'll hear about it. Also, you might see silos and inconsistent organization across departments or divisions or groups within an organization. And that works okay sometimes when an organization is siloed or when they're in silo mode. But as soon as that group within an organization has to collaborate either internally across departments or divisions or externally, it gets really confusing because the organization isn't aligned from a strategic standpoint. And then probably most commonly in my recent client engagements around document management, I hear about access challenges and specifically the lack of mobility when it comes to documents. Our users expect to have access to their documents, to their content and data, both when they're sitting at their desk in the office, but also on the go. So at Starbucks or at home when somebody gets sick. So that's really frustrating for users when they just feel kind of crippled by the lack of access to their content. So the first step to successful document management is to accept that document management is just more than a tech platform and more than those couple of configuration items like governance and folder structures and things. It requires, document management requires serious change in an organization, and it's important to consider it in that big, important way from the very beginning. So change isn't something that people naturally like. I think we can accept that as an assumption. So at the center of every document management project is the end user and guiding them through the project and then the ultimate implementation. So today I want to share a couple of strategies I've seen be successful with implementation projects. So things like user groups, pilot groups, or pilot champion teams is sometimes what we'll call those groups, but really integrating end users and leaders within the organization into the process. Things like end user testing, so not just the technical team testing to make sure that functional requirements and technical requirements are in theory met, but actually allowing end users to get their hands on the new technology early in the process. And then all of the change management stuff that's really important in any project that impacts the entirety of the user base in the way that document management does. So communication and expectation setting and training and all of that during the project, but then also following the project to aid in adoption, because an unadopted document management solution really isn't a document management solution at all. It's really not successful with that end of the day adoption piece by all end users. So I think one important thing to note here is just that document management solutions are always complex, and a lot of the time because we're thinking about just the technology piece or maybe the technology plus the governance and the security piece, folks are sometimes surprised by how complicated and difficult things get. And if you think about the end user from the very beginning, it can simplify things quite a bit. So just to reiterate here, how do you achieve success? You focus on the end user. So a document management implementation project is successful when the focus is on the end users from the beginning to the end of the project. So not just at kickoff and not just when it's time to train and go live, but all the way through the project. And it's really essential that stakeholders and leadership, both of the project and of the organization, are focused on end users and their daily lives. It's important to meet those end users where they are, where they live all day, every day, through the entirety of the project to make sure that they are accounted for at every stage. So how do you take an end user focused approach to document management? Today I'd like to run through just a couple of key strategies to achieving success in this area. So there are 4 areas I'll cover today. User engagement, the technology bit, organizational readiness, and cost. I'm actually going to leave user engagement to the end because that's where we'll focus the bulk of our time, but I'd like to cover these other 3 areas as well for you. So first, there's the technology piece. So when it comes to software selection, it's critical that you find the best solution and that you don't just go buy something. The first vendor salesperson to call you is likely not the right solution, or at least should be thoughtfully considered. So we use and consistently use a decision matrix that accounts for technical and functional requirements, cost, the future of the vendor organization as they continue to grow and adapt. So it's really important to account for all of those needs. We also think about usability, for example, as part of that, taking into account the end user base in an organization, and those end user bases differ per organization. So there's no one right choice for everyone when it comes to document management. It's important to be thoughtful and reflective on the front end during that selection phase. Then it's also important to think about cloud versus on-premises. So there are lots of benefits to going with an all-cloud solution when it comes to document management, but there are also some good justifications for a hybrid solution or an on-premises solution. So just part of the software selection process, but important to not make assumptions there and make sure that all technical and functional requirements are taken into account. And then lastly, when it comes to technology, important to engage the IT staff at the front end. So document management, as you'll hear me say quite a bit over the course of the rest of the webinar, is largely about the business and it's about the whole business. So it's not often IT-led, but the IT team is an essential part of a document management solution at the front end, but then also all through the project, and then perhaps most importantly, when it comes time to administer the solution. So they are ultimately responsible for the solution and its health ongoing. So it works best if you can engage and drive buy-in with that IT staff during the initial decision-making process. Secondly, let's talk a little bit about organizational readiness. So thinking about all the things that are going on in your organization and whether document management fits into that broader strategy at the moment. So are there other big initiatives and changes underway in the organization that impact users? How does document management fit into all of that, given that it does impact end users on a day-to-day and pretty deep basis? Also important to think about end user bandwidth. So we, during document management implementations, ask end users to engage at a pretty deep level and on a pretty frequent basis. So it's important that at all levels of the organization, end users have the time and just mental space to take on a project that requires deep thought and consideration and reflection on what the needs are to create a good solution for today, but also for the future. There's a lot of mental energy that goes into that. So really important that the end users are ready to take that on. Thirdly, there's the cost piece of this. So I won't belabor this, but it is an important consideration when organizations are thinking about a document management implementation project. So there are 3 real areas where you need to think about costs. The first is that technology bit. So depending on the solution that is selected as part of the software selection process, there may be licensing fees, there may be storage fees, or there may even be third-party tools that need to come alongside that platform solution to really enable it in the way that the organization needs. So cost associated with all of those various technologies. And then also, internal resources are dedicated to document management projects. So, of course, these are folks who are on staff and available to you, but think about the opportunity costs there. So, again, kind of going back to that big question about competing initiatives and priorities within the organization. Think about whether you have those internal resources to dedicate time to a project like this. And consider that cost as well. And then thirdly, there's the external resource cost. So Sometimes organizations will enlist the professional services group from the software vendor to help with a migration and configuration project. Sometimes organizations will hire an implementation partner to help run the project and see it to completion. And then also change management is sometimes an area where folks will enlist a partner who can help with all of that communication and training that's so essential in a project like this. So in summary, when you think about technology cost and internal resource and external resource costs, just be sure that that's the full breadth of the cost consideration. So it's not just about technology; it's really much more holistic than that. So the fourth bit here is that user engagement piece. So it's really important to have the right people in the room for a document management project. Leadership has to be bought in, not because they're the ones making all the decisions on a day-to-day basis about how the solution comes together, but because they define priorities for the organization. The leadership team has that say, so they define for the rest of the organization how much of a priority this project gets, how much time it gets, and how much the project champion team and ultimately end users are willing to dedicate to this initiative. So once bought in, once the leadership team is kind of ready to roll, they will be the ones to help develop communication cadence. They'll be the ones to help define how to engage end users in the project. And then ultimately, they're the ones to champion the initiative and continue endorsing the project via various communication media all along the way. So they'll be the ones to send emails to say, hey, how's it going? They'll send all organization emails to say, hey, we're excited about this thing and we endorse it. But important to engage them on the front end and get clear with that leadership team on why we as an organization see this as a priority, why we're taking it on now, and what the expectations are around the project so that they can speak to it in the right ways. Probably their most important function, though, is helping to define the pilot champion team. So we call the pilot champion team a couple of different things in client engagement. Sometimes it's a solution advisory group. Sometimes it's the super user group. But really, the profile of this group is that they are either formally or informally the leaders in the organization. They're the ones with some influence who really know and really care for their organization and can speak on behalf of their division or their department. So when we pull together a champion team or solution advisory group or ask for leadership's help in pulling together that group, we ask for representation from every department so that every department has a voice in the ultimate solutioning room. And these are the folks who get engaged at the very beginning, so they assist with kickoff and help with some of the planning activities, but then they're engaged all through the project. So helping with the details of things like folder structure organization and naming convention and assigning user groups to various bits of content. So they have to understand the organization at a pretty deep level to be able to speak to all of that. And then ultimately, they're kind of the flag bearers for the solution. So they carry that message forward into the organization, both in implementation, but then beyond. So they're the ones who are fully bought in and actually kind of accountable for the solution and can speak to it all along the way. They also sometimes serve important roles in uncovering key areas where the solution team needs more detail. So I'll give you one client example where this was really important. So we have this solution advisory group pulled together in this client example. Lots of departments in this scenario. So one individual from each department. And in a couple of the larger departments, we found that we just were not getting the traction that we needed. We felt like there were some stones unturned, some details that hadn't been brought to light quite yet. So the solution advisory group members couldn't speak to the level of detail we needed. However, they knew their organization such that they could identify the people who would have the answers to those questions. So instead of flailing around and just not getting the answers and solutioning based on incomplete information, we were able to target those individuals who would have those key pieces of information, reach out to them, and then create a comprehensive view into that department, just reaching out to a couple additional people. So that goes back to the importance of these solution advisory group pilot champion team members really knowing their organization from a document standpoint, but also from an organizational standpoint, understanding their people and how they work and what they're working on. So ultimately, this is about the end user. So document management impacts the entire organization. So it's really important to think deeply about where your user is when they're interacting with documents. The mobility piece is really important here. Who those users are. Do you have a mobile workforce? Folks who are working remote quite a bit, or do you have lots of different sites? Are people in the field a lot? They could be having challenges with having access to documents on their phones, for example, or on their iPads or laptops. Where are they and who are they? So knowing that end user base at a pretty deep level. Then it's important too to create an intuitive solution for end users. So accounting for every layer of that organization and making sure that every need is met. So thinking about things like the clickiness is what I sometimes call it of a solution. So how difficult is it going to be for the end user to access their key data? An example here is a client scenario where we have several discrete divisions in play. So these divisions act pretty much independently most of the time, but then they're brought together under one mission, vision, goal schema at the organizational level. So as a result, getting to know those users was a real challenge and actually pretty new for that leadership team. So from a document management perspective, there aren't that many connections. However, from a governance and maintenance and usability standpoint, most importantly, it was essential to get to know that user base and help guide the leadership and pilot champion team along the way to get to know those users so that all those needs were accounted for. And without going out and actually talking to those users, it's near impossible to understand them at the level of depth that's needed. There's another example here, just a fun example that I really love. In a couple years ago, we implemented a solution called Box for a client that is another example where they've got a remote workforce, lots of people in the field all the time, very rarely all together in the office. About once annually is the only time everyone in the organization is all together. So as a result, talking with every end user about the solution and asking them their opinions and getting them excited was going to be a real challenge. This was not a scenario where we could just invite everyone to a lunch and learn and kind of call it a day. It very rarely is. In this scenario, we needed to engage them at a deeper level. And so this client team, the pilot champion team in this project, elected to actually brand the project and brand the implementation. And as we were going live in October of that year, they branded it Boxtober and drove some excitement and energy and an organizational momentum around the project. And as a result, end users understood what the goal was and understood that this was an organizational initiative with real priority and also real importance. And building up a brand around a project like this aids in driving some of that energy and excitement and buy-in, and most importantly, understanding and asking of questions as well. So all of that said, how does one begin to embark upon a document management project? So what are those next steps or first steps? So first, it's important to determine the right solution for your organization and the technology that completes that solution. So doing a software selection analysis or assessment is really important at the very beginning of a document management project. So as part of that, assessing things like technical and functional requirements, assessing what the usability needs are for the organization, et cetera, is really essential. And then also making sure that the team is ready is a really important bit. So again, going back to what else do we have that's going on in our organization? What else will impact users this month, this quarter, this year? where does document management fit in? Is this an immediate need, or is this something that's, in our Q2 hopper for priority setting? You have appropriate budget set aside is an important question too. So again, thinking about technology costs, but also internal and external resource costs. And then starting to think too about who project champions might be in your organization. So identifying these folks sometimes takes a couple of mental cycles just to get to who are the people of influence. So not just the people who are sitting at a computer all day and probably interact with documents most, but the people who can be flag bearers for the document management solution ultimately. So the people who know and care about the organization, know and care about their individual department or division within the organization, and are comfortable speaking to all of those needs and really advocating for their organization, but then also bringing their organization along as the implementation project wraps up and as adoption begins. And then lastly, thinking about your end users and whether they're ready to adopt a new solution. And if not, how you get them there from a leadership and project champion standpoint. It's one of those things where, again, change is challenging. It's difficult. People don't naturally flock towards change. So important to not wait until everybody feels ready and willing to accept change, but being conscious of where your end users are and how ready they are to take on a project like this, where they will be guided along and things, is an important piece. So just in summary here, just to kind of wrap up, firstly, these are really just the big takeaways. So firstly, document management is more than a tool. It's more than a technology platform. It's more than a box or a SharePoint Online or Dropbox or Google Apps. It's everything that sits on top of that platform. So it's the people and the process that are most important in a document management solution. Secondly, change is difficult. Change is a challenge. So appropriate planning and support are really important as part of that broader change management plan. So setting expectations and communicating clearly about the how, but also more importantly, the why behind a document management solution is essential. And then thirdly, end users are the key. So instead of making this a top-down project that just kind of gets rolled out and end users are expected to come along at the very last minute at the 11th hour, end users should be incorporated into every phase of a project of this scale and scope. Asked their opinion and advocated for and focused on as part of every stage. So now I think we'd like to invite some questions from you folks. I might ask Steph to come over and facilitate some of these questions, and I'll give you my best answers.
Thank you so much, Ellen. That was great. A lot of really helpful information. Again, if you do have questions, please feel free to submit those in the chat box. One question that we did get in, Ellen, is what does the software selection piece of document management look like?
Yeah, so when we embark on a software selection, we're really focused on discovery and requirements gathering. So typically interacting quite a bit with each division or department. So understanding from a leadership standpoint what the end game is, what the goals are for the organization and for the new solution, but then talking with each individual group of end users to understand what their requirements are out of a solution like this. So accounting for technical requirements, but then functional requirements too, which is where end users really come into play. So what exactly does this need to do from an end user standpoint? And we account for all of that in a decision matrix. It's a pretty rigorous approach actually to software selection. So all of these different components, all of these different decision factors or points are weighted in that decision matrix, and we assess multiple solutions and then ultimately recommend a possible solution based on organizational requirements and priorities articulated by leadership.
Great. Another question we've had come in, what roles are typically needed as part of the implementation team?
Yeah, so there's a bit of a spread there depending on what the pilot champion team or the solution advisory group looks like from the client or the organization side. But typically, we're looking at an engagement manager, so somebody to kind of keep the wheels on. Maybe that's a project manager kind of profile. Somebody who is constantly aware of priorities from leadership and from the project champion team and can kind of guide things to completion and communicate about expectations and timelines and things like that. But then there's also one or multiple business analysts who are responsible for all of that discovery and requirements, and they're the ones who are interfacing on a day-to-day basis with the end users within the business. So they know the end users really well, and by the end of our projects, typically can advocate for end users almost as well as the project champion team can. So they are responsible for translating all of those business requests and needs into requirements that are then met in the ultimate solution. Sometimes too, organizations will bring on resources to help out from a technical standpoint. So if there's anything custom that's needed, you might have a developer or a solution architect that can help with things that aren't available just out of the box with technology solutions. And then two, if there's really complex training and communication needs in play, sometimes we'll bring on someone who's focused on just that bit of it, just the change management piece to help plan and develop content for change management.
Great answer. One final question that we've had come in is, Ellen, realistically, what is the cost associated with a project like this?
Yeah, so a lot of our determination of cost depends on the size of the organization, but also the complexity of the current state and also how engaged the pilot team and leadership are in the initiative. So if there's an awesome pilot team in place who can kind of go do some of that legwork around solutioning, then that's great, and we may not need to bring on that additional BA. We love a highly engaged team. But if the organization has made this document management initiative a priority, they don't have the time and bandwidth to deal with it internally, then sometimes we need to engage at a higher level to get it done in the right way, and that results in more cost, of course. So lots of variables that play into cost, but those are some of the key ones.
Great. I don't think we have any other questions for the rest of this afternoon. So we are going to go ahead and wrap up. Ellen, thank you for this presentation, and for all of our participants, thank you so much for dialing in. We will be sure to send a follow-up summary of the webinar, and Ellen's contact information will also be available with that. So if you do have further communication or questions you want to ask, please do reach out.